Ghost Story, The Abandoned Brick Kiln. Across generations, my grandfather still held on to our family's ancestral profession. His reputation for skill and virtue echoed throughout the region. Not only did he cure many serious illnesses, often without charging for medicine, but he also extended a helping hand to any family in need. He often said that the art of herbal medicine wasn't about amassing wealth but using his talent to save lives. In any circumstance, he dedicated himself wholeheartedly to healing, believing that's what truly makes a good physician. While not wealthy in material possessions, my grandfather was rich in humanity. He was respected and beloved by everyone in the area. His descendants all learned from his example, embodying filial piety and goodness. Our village and neighboring hamlets often looked to our family as a model for raising children. During that time, my grandfather was over 80 years old. Due to his frailty, the responsibility of preparing medicine gradually shifted to my father. Only for the most severe and challenging cases would my grandfather directly intervene, taking pulses and prescribing remedies. As the eldest son, my father and grandparents lived with our family. Our house, with its 5 spacious rooms, provided ample space. My grandfather chose the last room on the left as his place for drinking tea and reading. One evening, my grandfather stayed up very late engrossed in a rare traditional medicine book he had borrowed. He was so absorbed that he lost track of time. Suddenly, he heard dogs barking incessantly outside. He called out to my father, "Kwang, go outside and see what's causing the commotion." My father, who was sleeping, woke up, grabbed a hurricane lamp, and went out to the gate. A moment later, he returned. "There's nothing, father. Probably just someone passing by, and the dogs are curious. It's late. You should go to sleep," my father replied. "This book is too fascinating. Let me finish reading a few more pages before resting. It's a great honor that someone lent it to me," my grandfather said as he continued jotting down notes. A while later, the dogs started barking again as if they were chasing away something or someone trying to enter our gate. Irritated, my father quickly got up, grabbed a stick, and dispersed the dogs to their corners. "Why are they making such a fuss when there's nothing? Quiet down, all of you," my father scolded the dogs. After about 10 minutes of silence, the dogs suddenly sprang up again, rushing towards the gate, growling fiercely. Frowning, my grandfather set his book down, took his lamp and cane, and stepped out onto the courtyard. He noticed a faint figure outside the gate. Why couldn't Kwang see anything? Clearly, there must be someone or something that's making the dogs bark, my grandfather muttered to himself. Approaching the gate, he raised his lamp and saw an old woman, wearing a ragged cloak, with a basket of herbs on her head, respectfully nodding. "Good evening, sir," she greeted. "Good evening. On such a late night like this, what brings you here?" My grandfather responded. "Well, sir, it's my daughter-in-law. She's been ill for days, and despite all kinds of medication, her condition hasn't improved. Tonight, her pain is unbearable, so I dared to knock on your door, hoping you would take pity and save her," the old woman explained. Years of practicing medicine, my grandfather encountered numerous urgent cases where, even in the dead of night, people would come knocking at our door just like this. Regardless of the hour or distance, my grandfather would grab his medical bag and rush to help. Now in his old age, he often sent my father in his place for cases like these. "All right, let me wake up Kwang and accompany you to their house," my grandfather said. The old woman hesitated before speaking. "My granddaughter-in-law's illness seems severe. Only a skilled doctor like you can save her. I beg for your mercy to help her. My family will forever be grateful." My grandfather chuckled. "Kwang is quite adept at preparing medicine himself, no less than me. You can rest assured. I'm old and find it difficult to move around. My granddaughter-in-law has heard of your reputation for a long time. She's been hoping to meet you. Please do your best to help. Our house is nearby," the old woman insisted. My grandfather hesitated for a moment but thought that since it wasn't far, he could manage. Saving a life was crucial. especially when someone was in such urgent need. So he agreed to accompany the old woman. The village was quiet, with all the houses along the road already darkened for the night. The old woman, slightly bent with age, led the way, while my grandfather followed with his lantern and medical bag. Passing through the village square and the village pond, they headed straight for the fields. Suddenly, the old woman stopped and pointed ahead. "That house with the lights is my son's," she said. My grandfather followed her gesture and saw a large, dignified 3-room brick house, its door wide open, with 2 lamps lit inside, illuminating a young man sitting by the bed and a woman wrapped in blankets, her face pale. "The couple is waiting for you, sir," the old woman said as she pushed the door open wider. "My granddaughter-in-law is my son's wife. Since she fell ill, he has been tirelessly taking care of her every night like this. It's quite pitiful." My grandfather glanced around. The house seemed quite old but well organized and tidy. Judging by the clothes, paintings on the wall, and household items, the owner seemed quite affluent. But why were they living outside the village like this? Without hesitation, the young woman let out a soft moan. "Hang in there a bit longer, dear. Dr. Kwan is here now. He's famous in this region, you can rest assured," her husband comforted her gently. My grandfather quickly took the girl's pulse. After a few moments, he smiled and said, "This ailment is simple. It's just aggravated because your family gave her too many medicines haphazardly. I'll cut down on a few, and she'll feel better in 3 days. After that, she should have chicken soup with Chinese foxglove, it will aid in her recovery." After prescribing the medicine, the old woman led my grandfather back to the gate, thanking him politely before departing. Several months passed without the old woman's return. My grandfather assumed that her granddaughter-in-law had recovered. On a full moon night, my grandfather set up a bamboo stool in the courtyard to admire the moon and drink tea, occasionally puffing on his pipe, letting the smoke drift lazily in the breeze from the river. "Go to bed, it's late," my grandmother called out from inside the house. "The moon is exceptionally beautiful tonight, with clear skies and no clouds. I'll admire it for another 20 minutes then go in," my grandfather replied. Every moonlit night, he enjoyed tea and moon gazing like this. During these times, he often contemplated and composed a few verses of poetry. He was quite skilled in poetry and often recited his works during the elderly villagers' gatherings. Suddenly, he heard the dogs barking outside the alley, then gradually approaching our gate. From a distance, he could see a figure lurking near the gate. "Who's there? Wait for me to open the gate," he called out. "Greetings, sir," a voice replied. It was the old woman from before, bringing my grandfather to her daughter-in-law's house for treatment. "Please come in and have some water. What brings you here so late at night?" my grandfather asked. "Thank you, but I'll pass for now. My daughter-in-law is in pain, hoping you could kindly prepare some medicine for her," she replied. "Is she experiencing a relapse?" my grandfather inquired. "No, she slipped on the edge of the field and dislocated her ankle. It's swollen and bruised, and she can't walk," the old woman explained. After a brief moment, my grandfather said, "Let me come over early tomorrow to reset her ankle. It's too late now. She's been suffering for a week. She couldn't bear it any longer, so I had to come and beg for your help. Please try to help tonight. She's in so much pain, it's heartbreaking," the old woman pleaded anxiously. Seeing the old woman's distress, my grandfather nodded in agreement. Following her, they soon arrived at the house. Everything was as before. The husband was sitting beside his wife, consoling and encouraging her. Her injured leg had swollen considerably, blood pooling under the skin. My grandfather reset her ankle and applied medicine to reduce the bruising. "Let her lie down and keep her ankle in the position I've set. Limit her movement. In 3 days, I'll come again with a different medicine," my grandfather instructed. The old woman and her son thanked him profusely, offering him a boiled chicken and a bundle of money. My grandfather waved it away. "These herbs are readily available in my garden, no need for payment," he said. Please accept it. This is my mother's heartfelt gratitude to you. Coming to our house late at night like this is a blessing for our family, the son insisted. Despite refusing several times, my grandfather eventually accepted it to make them happy. The old woman escorted my grandfather back home, and by the time they arrived, the roosters were crowing for dawn. Since taking over the medical visits and prescriptions for my father, my grandfather had more free time. On days when he wasn't out gathering herbs, he would play chess in the village square or drink tea with the elderly. One day, while playing chess with Mr. Tutui, he got so engrossed that he didn't realize how late it had gotten. Remembering that it had been 3 days since he visited the old woman's daughter-in-law, he said, "I have to go and change the medicine for them tonight. Please excuse me, we can continue our game another time." Mr. Tutui, still absorbed in the game, didn't want to stop. "Let Kwang handle those things, he's of age now, let him take care of it. There's no rush. The family insists that I must personally adjust the medicine for them to feel at ease. Since they asked, I can't refuse," my grandfather replied. "In that case, go now, then come back and continue the game at my house. My son-in-law has brewed some excellent tea to share," Mr. Tutui suggested. My grandfather suddenly remembered that the 2 previous visits to the old woman's house had been at night, and he couldn't quite recall the route. "I have to wait for someone to guide me. I'm not sure of the time, can't make plans with you," my grandfather replied. "Well, this village is small. I know all the houses and alleys. Why don't you just go yourself to save time?" Mr. Tutui squinted thoughtfully. "Their house is outside the fields, and I'm not familiar with the route," my grandfather explained. Mr. Tutui narrowed his eyes in contemplation. My grandfather vividly remembered both times he visited the old woman's house at night, but now he couldn't recall the route. "I have to wait for someone to guide me. I'm not sure of the time, can't make plans with you," my grandfather replied. "Well, this village is small. I know all the houses and alleys. Why don't you just go yourself to save time?" Mr. Tutui squinted thoughtfully. "Their house is outside the fields, and I'm not familiar with the route," my grandfather explained. Mr. Tutui narrowed his eyes in contemplation. "Our village doesn't have houses outside the fields, how strange. My house is near the edge of the field, so how could I not know?" Mr. Tutui wondered. "Indeed, I rarely go to the fields to gather herbs. My descendants usually do that, so I'm not very familiar with them. That night, I couldn't remember the way to the old woman's daughter-in-law," my grandfather confessed. "That's impossible. I'm sure you made a mistake. In our village, there are no houses outside the fields on both sides." "Did you go to the Ma or Mu fields?" Mr. Tutui inquired. "Our village has 2 fields. Behind the village temple is the Ma field, and at the foot of the fairy mountain is the Mu field," my grandfather explained. The names of the 2 fields have been around for a long time. The Ma field is near the village cemetery, while the Mu field has a temple dedicated to the village deity. Perhaps that's why our ancestors named the village fields that way. After pondering for a while, my grandfather said, "It's the Ma field. At night, I could vaguely see the graves in our village cemetery." Mr. Tutui slammed his hand on the table. "My house is near the Mu field, a bit far from the Ma field, but my son Huan lives nearby. I visit my grandson often, so I'm familiar with the area. There's no house there at all. Did you mistake something when you looked around at night?" Hearing Mr. Tutui's firm assertion, my grandfather felt puzzled. My grandfather was usually focused on his medicine-making profession, seldom paying attention to the field's details, so he wasn't familiar with whether there were any houses near the Ma or Mu fields. But with clear visibility, how could he have been mistaken about the houses? "Hey, could you have been treating ghosts?" Mr. Tutui whispered. "The Ma field is full of ghosts, many people have seen them." "What ghosts? Come on, I reset someone's joints with my own hands," my grandfather laughed. "Anyway, it's late now, I'll take my leave." My grandfather was deeply concerned about the patient. He always prioritized the patient's health above all else. It had been 3 days, and it was necessary to change the medicine for the old woman's daughter-in-law. Uneven medication application might hinder her recovery, but not remembering the route made it difficult to get there. Restlessly pacing back and forth in the courtyard, it was around 11 o'clock at night when the dogs barked loudly outside the gate. Hurrying out, my grandfather found it was indeed the old woman from the other night. "I planned to go there, but I didn't know the way," he said. "Yes, hello, sir. I remember your instructions. Today marks 3 days, so I've come to invite you to visit my granddaughter-in-law," the old woman said. This time, my grandfather tried to observe and memorize the route, so he could go there on his own next time, without needing the old woman's guidance. Passing behind the village temple and walking for a while, they reached a large, deserted brick kiln. Following the edge of the fields, they eventually arrived at a strawberry patch, then crossed a vast cornfield. The journey was quite long, quiet, and eerie in the stillness of the night. It took quite a while to reach the destination. On a high mound of earth stood a 3-room brick house, its dim lights flickering inside. The old woman's son and daughter-in-law warmly welcomed my grandfather into their home. "Is the pain getting better?" my grandfather asked. "It's less painful than a few days ago," the young woman replied. My grandfather took out the old medicine again, and the swelling on the young woman's foot had significantly reduced, with only slight bruising left. "It's getting better. Just change the medicine this time, and it will be fine," my grandfather said with a smile. This was how my grandfather approached his role as a doctor. When he saw his patients improving, he was as delighted as if it were his own success. When practicing medicine, he was fully immersed, seemingly oblivious to his surroundings. After applying the new medicine, the young woman felt relieved and thanked my grandfather politely. Her husband brought out a basket of fruits and a bundle of money, calling it a token of gratitude. "No, there's no need. As I said before, I harvested these herbs from my garden, so it didn't cost me anything. And this fruit is for your wife's speedy recovery," my grandfather insisted. "You should take it for the happiness of our family," the old woman insisted. "No, I've been practicing medicine for many years, and I only accept payment for serious cases or for medicine in rare situations. For simple joint problems like this, I do it out of goodwill," my grandfather declined firmly. My grandfather did not accept the payment, but the old woman insisted that they would always remember his kindness. The old woman walked ahead, leading the way to take my grandfather back home. Old Tutui is clever, not some sort of demon. Maybe their family just moved here recently, so few people know. This field is close to the haunted marsh, and people are afraid because of the rumors, but there are no demons, my grandfather thought to himself. After passing through the cornfield, we reached the lotus pond. There were no flowers today, only dry, withered leaves scattered around. Suddenly, my grandfather noticed many fireflies flickering above the surface of the pond. It was strange, he didn't see them when we walked by earlier. How could there be so many now? Tonight there's no moon, but with no clouds in the sky, the starlight still illuminated the surroundings. Suddenly, he glimpsed 3 children playing in a corner of the pond, their shadows bouncing, appearing and disappearing. Strange, at this hour, how could any children from any household be playing around here? My grandfather shuddered at the thought, wondering if they were perhaps ghosts. He hurriedly approached the old woman to ask if she saw those children resembling him. Suddenly, he was shocked, almost screaming when he noticed the old woman had no shadow on the ground. Her feet were not touching the ground, but gliding over the grass. My grandfather's spine chilled, and he squinted his eyes to look closer. This time she was walking on the ground, but there was clearly no shadow trailing behind her. Shivering, he hastily recited a calming mantra. When we reached the gate, the old woman courteously bid farewell and left. All night, my grandfather couldn't sleep, terrified. It was only then that he remembered a few days ago he received a package containing cooked chicken and a bundle of money, which he had forgotten. Due to his old age, he often remembered things out of order. He quickly searched for it and opened it. The chicken had gone bad, emitting a sour odor, with maggots wriggling inside, utterly horrifying. Even more surprising, the bundle of money from the previous day was now just muddy, tattered bills. All night, my grandfather couldn't sleep, frightened. The next morning, he hurried to visit old Tutui. Hello, I visited her house last night. It must have been a ghost, not a person. But what's strange is that the house, I remember clearly, I even knocked, how could it be like that? He said. Ha ha, old Tutui laughed heartily. Well, now you and I will go to Marfield, and everything will be clear. Old Tutui led my grandfather through a shortcut to the field. When we arrived at the spot where the house stood last night, there was only a deserted brick kiln. Surrounding it were a few graves, overgrown with weeds. My grandfather's eyes widened in disbelief, unable to utter a word. Where is the house? You've met a ghost, old Tutui said slowly. This brick kiln belonged to Mr. Lai Tuan. In the year of the epidemic, 3 beggars were found dead inexplicably. The villagers buried him around the brick kiln. Since then, every time the bricks were fired, the kiln collapsed, time after time. Mr. Lai Tuan had to abandon it. No longer working, it became desolate. People working in the fields early in the morning, or returning late at night, often encountered the ghosts of the beggar family. Right, my grandfather thought to himself. Every time I came, I felt the house was eerie. The girl's foot felt stiff, not as soft as normal. Too frightening. From that day on, my grandfather fell ill for 2 weeks, always anxious and worried. Over 3 months later, one evening, my grandfather placed a bamboo bed outside to rest in the cool breeze. With the clear moon and refreshing wind, he fell asleep peacefully. Suddenly, he saw the old woman again. She folded her hands respectfully and greeted him, saying, I've come to bid farewell. Tomorrow my 3 children and I have to leave here, a huge flood is coming soon. And you should also quickly pack up and move to another place, or else you won't make it in time. After speaking, the old woman disappeared into the misty fog. Waking up, my grandfather recounted it to my father. My father said, I don't know if it's true, but tomorrow, we'll still have the kids pack up their belongings and put them high up. With continuous storms these past few days, there might be flooding. The next day, it rained heavily all day without stopping, and the river water rose rapidly. By nightfall, the water had flooded the village, covering the fields completely, and the villagers scrambled to escape the flood. That year, my village experienced the largest flood in its history. Crops failed, and famine spread everywhere. Once, my grandfather went to the village of Bai Ha for medical treatment. Since my father was busy with work in the district, my grandfather had to pack up and go alone. After the treatment, when returning in the scorching noon sun, he stopped by a banyan tree to rest briefly. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew through, rustling the leaves. My grandfather closed his eyes to rest. Suddenly, he heard a faint voice in his ear. Teacher, greetings. It's been a while since I last saw you. Today, my wife was cured by you and is completely recovered from her illness. My family doesn't know how to thank you enough. My parents have been appointed as the guardians of this village. Please rest here and wait for the ferry after the hoi hour. My grandfather woke up, and not far away, he saw a temple emitting thick incense smoke. Following the instructions, after the hoi hour, he went down to the van dock to take the ferry home. From a distance, he saw a crowd of people gathering around the riverbank. When he got closer, he learned that they were trying to retrieve the body of a drowning victim. The ferry he had just taken across the river had capsized due to a whirlpool, and all 5 people aboard had drowned. The bodies of 4 were swept away by the current and couldn't be found. My grandfather was startled, realizing that if he hadn't stopped at the banyan tree, he would have been on that tragic ferry. The old woman's son had foretold his fate, saving him from certain death. Since then, every full moon and the first day of the month, My grandfather would visit the temple in Bihar village to burn incense, expressing gratitude for the kindness of the old woman's son, now the guardian spirit of this village. The end.
Hopefully the content has brought you interesting and meaningful moments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel to follow the channel's next videos. See you in the next video. Have a good day.